We've been through the ringer with the Alien franchise over the years, ranging from the absolute masterclass tension of Isolation to the let's blow up everything co-op of Fireteam Elite, but Alien Rogue Incursion Evolved Edition occupies this weirdly fascinating middle ground. Now, this originally launched as a VR exclusive, and usually, when a developer tries to squeeze a VR game onto a standard monitor, it ends up feeling about as natural as trying to eat soup with a fork. But Surveos actually put some real elbow grease into this Evolved Edition for PC and consoles, turning it into a gorgeous, highly tense first-person action horror game that does not play around. You play as Zula Hendrix, a rogue colonial marine investigating a Weyland-Yutani black site on the planet Purdon alongside a synth companion named Davis-01, who is essentially your robotic moral compass. The star of the show is unsurprisingly the xenomorphs themselves. They aren't just mindless drones that run straight into your shotgun barrel. They stalk, they flank, and they hide in the vents, utilizing a terrifyingly unpredictable AI that makes every beep on your motion tracker feel like a mini heart attack. When you aren't sneaking through dark, dripping industrial hallways, you're engaged in desperate heavy-duty firefights where weapon recoil and reload times actually matter. It's a game that forces you to respect the creature, making you feel incredibly vulnerable even when you're holding a pulse rifle.
Biomechanical creatures, an arsenal of modifiable weapons, and a mysterious origin to
If you've ever looked at the roguelite genre and thought, you know what this needs? Way more industrial space grime and a protagonist who actively hates billionaires, then Deadzone Rogue is going to be your next hyperfixation. Developed by Prophecy Games, this is a blisteringly fast, punchy FPS that drops you onto the ISS-X, a massive, derelict space station overrun by homicidal security robots and twisted, fleshy bio-monsters. But what makes Deadzone stand out in an incredibly crowded sea of run-and-gun shooters is that it actually forces you to use your brain before you pull the trigger. Every single room you enter starts in stealth mode, giving you a quiet, highly tense window to scope out the geometry, identify the big threats, and set up a devastating ambush before the metal meets the meat. And once the bullets start flying, the game transforms into a glorious neon-drenched ballet of destruction. You start with a basic pistol, but the progression mechanic is beautifully generous, showering you in over 30 unique, upgradable elemental weapons, from heavy plasma shotguns to insane chain lightning miniguns. Your character is this wonderfully gruff, deeply sarcastic amnesiac who spends his time roasting the corporate overlords responsible for the disaster, which gives the run-and-die gameplay a great cynical sense of humor. Sure, the industrial, sterile aesthetic of the space station rooms can get a bit samey after your 15th consecutive death, and some of the gimmicky charge shot weapons feel about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. If you played the first game back in 2022, you already know whether your tolerance for screaming, neurotic alien firearms is high enough to survive another round, but High on Life 2 actually tries to respect your sanity this time around by giving you a voice. Yeah, they added actual dialogue options so you can finally talk back to your arsenal of Gatlians, which makes the whole experience feel less like you're trapped in a minivan with an over-caffeinated teenager who just discovered energy drinks, and more like a bizarre buddy cop dynamic where the cop is a gun that wants to murder corporate pharmaceutical executives. And that's the actual plot, by the way. 5 years after saving humanity, you're a big shot bounty hunter. But now a galactic pharmaceutical conglomerate wants to grind humans down into prescription pills. To stop them, Squanch Games basically took the golly, traversing this hub is slow feedback from the first game and decided to slap a rocket-propelled skateboard between your feet. It was apparently a cut feature from the original, but here is the absolute star of the show, turning the 3 massive Metroidvania hub worlds into your personal Tony Hawk playground. You're sliding, double jumping, grappling, and kick-flipping through alien environments while your pistol screams at you to hit a sick grind. Sure, the gunplay itself still has that slightly floaty, bullet-spongy feel, and the launch had enough technical hiccups to make you think the game's code was as high as its writing staff, but the boss fights are genuinely creative, and the sheer mechanical momentum is a massive step up.
Welcome to the trap, mouse!
Every now and then, a pitch gets greenlit that sounds so unhinged you have to check your morning coffee for hallucinogens, and Mouse PI for Hire is the poster child for that. Imagine Steamboat Willie, except instead of whistling happily on a boat, he's a deeply traumatized, hard-boiled detective voiced by Troy Baker, who is currently mowing down cartoon gangsters with a Tommy gun. You play as Jack Pepper in Mouseburg, a 1934 noir city built on anthropomorphic rodent corruption and cheese-legging, where melted cheese is treated like bootleg whiskey and blue cheese is literally the local equivalent of hard drugs. It's a brilliant aesthetic gimmick, but the genius of Mouse is that it doesn't just rest on its rubber hose animation laurels. The game actually splits its time between slow, atmosphere-drenched detective work where you're looking for clues and incredibly violent, high-tempo arena shootouts where cartoon limbs fly off in glorious black and white. The weapon feedback is incredibly snappy, letting you blast enemy rats with heavy shotguns or blow them away with dynamic gadgets, while classic big band jazz swells in the background. It's got style dripping out of every single pore, a surprisingly engaging narrative about rodent organized crime, and it proves once and for all that nothing cures a rainy day in a corrupt city quite like a shot of melted cheddar and a fully loaded drum mag.
You're never gonna guess what happened. Dex put a hit on me. I took a bullet.
At this point, talking about the disastrous launch of Cyberpunk 2077 feels like beating a dead horse that has already been digitized, uploaded to the net, and turned into a meme. But looking at where the game stands today, it is wild to realize that CD Projekt Red didn't just fix a broken product, they actually managed to deliver one of the most engrossing, visually stunning sci-fi RPGs of all time. Night City is no longer just a gorgeous cardboard cutout. It is a living, breathing, profoundly depressing neon playground that swallows you whole. The sheer depth of the 2.0 update overhauled how you actually play, turning V from a standard gun-toting mercenary into a terrifying, customizable cybernetic force of nature. If you want to build a character who literally slows down time to slice 3 gang members in half before their bodies even hit the pavement, you can do that. If you want to be a silent hacker who sits across the street making enemy weapon systems explode with your mind, the game actively rewards your deviousness. It's this beautiful, violent sandbox backed by some of the absolute best writing and character work in the industry, because let's be real, we all still carry emotional scars from how some of these storylines resolve. Sure, you're still going to encounter the occasional floating cigarette or a pedestrian who decides to walk directly through a solid concrete wall, but the raw atmosphere, the heavy electronic score, and the absolute desperation of trying to survive a corporate dystopia make it an essential masterpiece. On paper, Neon White sounds like a game created on a dare by a group of developers who spent way too much time on late-night anime forums. You play as an assassin named White who is plucked from hell to compete in a demon-slaying tournament in heaven, all while chatting up characters who speak in the kind of weapons-grade unrefined cringe that makes you want to crawl inside your own collar and stay there. But here's the crazy part. The second you actually start playing, all of that narrative weirdness evaporates because the gameplay is pure digital crack. The core mechanic is genius. You run through bite-sized levels, picking up cards that represent guns, but instead of just shooting them, you can discard them to trigger a movement ability. Discarding a pistol gives you a double jump, tossing a rifle gives you a forward dash, and suddenly you're turning a traditional shooter into a high-speed, hyper-optimized puzzle where you're trying to shave milliseconds off your run. You're not only playing an FPS, you're doing spatial geometry at 200 miles an hour, planning out exactly when to shoot a demon, when to slide on water, and when to sacrifice your shotgun just to fling yourself across a massive gap. It tap dances on that perfect line between absolute frustration and absolute euphoria, especially because the instant restart button is so fast it practically reads your mind. You will find yourself running the same 40-second level for 2 hours straight, completely losing your mind just to beat your friend's leaderboard score by 0.03 seconds.
Rapture is coming back to life.
If you want to talk about games that altered the DNA of the industry, you have to talk about BioShock, and getting all 3 of these legendary titles packed into the collection is basically a crash course in how to build an atmosphere that refuses to leave your brain. Going back to Rapture in the first 2 games is still a masterclass in environmental storytelling. The moment your bathysphere descends into that leaky, decaying Art Deco nightmare, you're immediately suffocated by this sense of dread and wet, rusty history. Let's be honest though, going back to the original BioShock, also means remembering that the hacking minigame was essentially a high-stress plumber simulator that paused time while mutated citizens were actively trying to cave your skull in with lead pipes. But the core gameplay of combining weird plasmids, like firing actual swarms of angry hornets from your wrists with a hefty wrench swing or a shotgun blast, is just as incredibly satisfying as it was almost 20 years ago. And then you have BioShock 2, which gets way too much hate considering it actually refined the combat to perfection and lets you play as an actual Big Daddy, drill dashing through corridors and desperately defending little sisters from waves of splicers. Once you're done drowning in the ocean, the collection flings you up into BioShock Infinite, swapping the damp claustrophobia of the seafloor for a bright, sunlit floating city in the clouds that is secretly harboring a terrifyingly cultish society. The skyhook traversal in Infinite adds this crazy verticality that turns encounters into fast-paced roller coaster arenas. If Doom 2016 was a brilliant revival of classic bloody action, then Doom Eternal is that same revival, but after chugging a gallon of pre-workout and jumping out of a moving helicopter. ID Software looked at the incredibly fun power fantasy of the first game and decided, no, this is too easy, we need to make these players sweat. They transformed the Slayer into a highly efficient heavy metal gymnast, stripping away the ability to just stand in a corner and shoot. In Eternal, if you stop moving for even a single second, the AI will happily dismantle your health bar and laugh in your face. It forces you into this relentless, hyper-violent resource management that acts like a game of high-speed chess played with chainsaws. You need ammo. You have to chainsaw an imp. You need armor. Set a demon on fire with your shoulder-mounted flame belch. You need health. Get in close and trigger a gory glory kill. It is a constant, exhausting dance of swapping weapons on the fly, using your super shotgun's meat hook to swing across giant arenas, and freezing groups of gargoyles with an ice bomb just to catch your breath. And let's be honest, the Marauder still gives people nightmares because he completely broke the standard power fantasy, forcing you to actually slow down, wait for his green-eyed parry window, and quick swap your weapons like a caffeinated pro esports player. The platforming sections, where you're swinging off monkey bars over pools of lava, can feel a bit like a weird first-person Mario game, and the lore gets surprisingly complicated for a series about an angry silent guy who solves interdimensional political crises by punching heads off. In a sea of post-apocalyptic shooters that want you to feel like a radioactive superhero, Metroid 2033 Redux is a beautiful, miserable slap in the face that reminds you that the end of the world is actually going to be cold, dark, and incredibly stressful. Set in the crumbling, mutant-infested subway tunnels of Moscow, this Redux version takes the legendary atmosphere of the original cult classic and drags it into the much smoother engine of Last Light, giving you the absolute best way to suffer through Artyom's journey. This is a game that is utterly obsessed with tactile immersion. You're not only looking at a clean head-up display, you have to manually pull out a physical clipboard and flick a lighter to check your objectives. Use a clunky hand pump charger to keep your flashlight from dying in the pitch black, and literally wipe blood and mutant slime off your gas mask visor with a dedicated button. Speaking of the gas mask, nothing in gaming matches the pure chest-tightening anxiety of exploring the dead frozen surface of Moscow while listening to Artyom's breathing get increasingly ragged because you only have 30 seconds of filter time left and a giant winged demon is circling overhead. Even the economy is beautifully bleak. High-quality military-grade ammunition is the literal currency of the Metro. Every time you get cornered by a pack of shrieking mutants, you have to make the painful mental calculation of whether you're shooting your way out or literally blasting your retirement savings into a monster's face. We need to address the elephant in the room immediately. The main story of Borderlands 3 has the narrative grace of a car alarm featuring villainous streamer twins who are so actively grating, they make you want to play the entire game with your headset on mute. But once you accept that the writing is a lost cause, Borderlands 3 Ultimate Edition reveals itself to be an absolute mechanical titan of the looter-shooter genre. This bundle is the definitive, absolutely bloated package of mayhem, stuffing the base game alongside all 6 major expansions, including the fantastic space western Bounty of Blood and the wonderfully trippy Psycho Krieg campaign. Gearbox didn't just iterate on the gunplay here, they perfected it. The movement has this meaty, sliding, mantling momentum that makes previous games in the series feel like they were played in slow motion, turning every gunfight into a high-speed playground. And the guns themselves are gloriously absurd. We are talking about shotguns that fire bouncing lasers, sniper rifles that spawn tiny volcanoes, and pistols that literally sprout legs and shout verbal insults at bandits when you throw them to reload. The Ultimate Edition also includes the Designer's Cut, which introduces a brilliant fourth skill tree for each of the Vault Hunters and the Arms Race mode, a roguelike-inspired extraction setup that strips away your god-tier gear and actually forces you to care about basic low-tier weapons again. After almost a decade of radio silence, developmental reboots, and enough internet anxiety to power a small nation, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond finally dropped, and the relief is almost palpable. Retro Studios didn't just play it safe, they essentially handed us a gorgeous, moody sci-fi masterpiece on the Nintendo Switch 2 that proves Samus is still the undisputed queen of isolation. The graphical jump is genuinely jaw-dropping, especially if you're running it at a silky smooth 120 frames per second in performance mode, making every damp, dripping cavern and ancient alien relic look like a high-budget film. But here's where things get interesting, and a little divisive. Retro took some massive swings this time. They gave Samus literal psychic powers, which turned traditional exploration into a trippy detective game where you're revealing hidden platforms and guiding shots around corners. They also dropped us into Soul Valley, a massive hub world where you literally cruise around on a futuristic motorcycle called the Viola. Now, look, cruising through a desert on an alien bike sounds incredibly cool on paper, but in practice, it's a bit of a barren, clunky chore that mostly exists, so you can collect green energy shards to pad out the game's 15-hour runtime. And don't get me started on your Galactic Federation companions who apparently went to the school of over-explaining puzzles every 5 seconds when you just want to scan some radioactive moss in peace. If you've ever watched Paul Verhoeven's 1997 masterpiece Starship Troopers and thought, gee, I'd love to sign my life away to a fascistic space federation in exchange for getting chewed in half by a giant insect, then Starship Troopers Ultimate Bug War is the pure, glorious state-sponsored propaganda simulator you've been waiting for. This retro-style shooter is framed entirely as an in-universe training program, complete with hilariously hammy live-action cutscenes starring Casper Van Dien reprising his role as an eye patch-wearing Johnny Rico, who is still unbelievably cool. You play as Major Sammy Dietz across wide-open battlefields where you're tasked with doing your part, which mostly boils down to turning giant alien bugs into green goo, throwing blocks of C4 into dark holes, and calling in tactical airstrikes that almost always miss because the bugs move faster than the Federation's budget-grade targeting computers. The gunplay feels incredibly solid, with retro crunchy weapon feedback, and jumping into a mech suit to cut through a horde of bugs is pure, unadulterated, dumb fun. However, the game makes a bizarre pivot by letting you play a secondary bug campaign where you control an assassin bug to raise the terror level among human troops. This mode is, well, it's basically a clunky, janky prawn simulator where the physics completely break down and your AI bug allies mostly just block your view while getting stuck in doorways. But despite the weird bug missions missing the mark, the core human campaign is a blast.
Here to have a bloody good time.
Let's be entirely honest. Loving Apex Legends is basically a full-time job where your boss constantly changes the rules and occasionally charges you $20 for a digital sticker. We are years into this game's life cycle now, and the relationship between Respawn and the player base has evolved into a toxic, beautiful dance where we all threaten to uninstall the game every single Tuesday, only to find ourselves back in a sweat-drenched lobby by Thursday night. But here is the objective truth that no amount of EA pricing drama or frustrating Battle Pass tweaks can erase. Mechanically, Apex is still the absolute gold standard of the Battle Royale genre. The moment-to-moment movement in this game is so incredibly kinetic that going back to almost any other multiplayer shooter feels like trying to run through wet cement. The slide jumping, the wall bouncing, the zipline dancing, it all combines into a high-speed chess match where positioning and split-second mechanical execution are everything. And when you get a squad together that actually communicates, instead of solo dropping into hot drops just to disconnect the millisecond they get knocked down, the tactical synergy is unmatched. Sure, the skill ceiling is currently so high it's practically orbiting the moon, and entering a public match as a casual player is basically an invitation to get instantly dismantled by a 3-stack of players who haven't seen sunlight since 2019. Let's be honest, the late 90s was an absolute golden era for throwing dynamite bundles into crowds of screaming cultists, and Night Dive's blood-refreshed supply is basically a direct injection of pure retro adrenaline. For decades, Caleb, our favorite undead trenchcoat-wearing gunslinger who sounds like he gargles glass and cheap whiskey for breakfast, was trapped in the PC gaming history books. But this definitive remaster finally drags his pitchfork-wielding corpse onto modern consoles. If you've never played the original Blood, you need to understand that this isn't just a simple Doom clone. It's a beautifully sick Lovecraftian playground where your starter weapon is literally a pitchfork and a flare gun that slowly cooks enemies until they burst into campy, screaming heaps of pixels. You're navigating these incredibly complex keycard hoarding levels while dual-wielding submachine guns, tossing aerosol can flamethrowers, and stabbing voodoo dolls to make cultists explode from 50 yards away. Night Dive did their usual wizardry here, preserving the greasy build engine charm while packing in everything from the classic expansions to the legendary ultra-masochistic fan-made Death Wish campaign, making it a colossal package of 40+ levels of pixelated gore. It's tough as nails, unapologetically campy, and has a secondary fire mode for almost every weapon that makes you wonder why modern shooters ever stopped doing this.
The vault doors are sealed for your safety.
Bethesda has entered the territory where they can't stop selling us the same games over and over again, and honestly, we only have ourselves to blame because we keep buying them. Enter Fallout 4 Anniversary Edition, marking a decade of our collective obsession with hoarding desk fans and duct tape in a ruined, radioactive Boston. Now, if you played the original, you already know that the base game is a bit of a weird beast. It stripped out a lot of the deep, choice-driven role-playing of New Vegas in favor of a voice protagonist who mostly just says yes, sarcastic yes, or give me money. But this definitive bundle basically takes that slightly flawed skeleton, coats it in 40 layers of polish, and stuffs it with every single scrap of DLC alongside over 150 Creation Club items. This means your current playthrough isn't just about finding your missing son, which, let's be honest, we all put on the back burner for 300 hours anyway. It's about wandering into the Commonwealth with customized Tesla power armor, wielding ridiculously overpowered prototype weapons, and turning your settlements into absolute fortresses. It runs great on the Switch too. You can experience the horrific sight of a feral ghoul lunging at your face while you're literally sitting on a public bus. Yes, the engine is still held together by digital duct tape and prayer, and you will absolutely watch a Brahmin spawn on top of a roof for no apparent reason, but the core gameplay remains insanely addictive.
Okay everyone, thanks so much for watching. If you liked that video, please leave a like and subscribe, and ring the bell if you want to get notified when we release new content. We hope to see you in the next video.